There really is something very otherworldly, very special about the parent-child bond, where you really do have an otherworldly love and ability to sacrifice and desire to sacrifice for your kids. But when it comes to children at large, we do not seem to have that same level of collective will to sacrifice for the next generation. And a whole generation of kids are suffering as a result, to the point where I don't know how we pull out of this. I don't know how we get to the place. I mean, we are digging the next generation into such a financial, cultural, national security, local security, international security hole. How do they dig out of this? I mean, we are burdening them with something that is so great that they didn't choose, but that they're going to have to deal with, simply because we are not willing to do the hard thing here and now, right? We would rather offload it onto the next generation. So I don't know what the solution is, except to make the direct connection between the bad policies that we are buying into, advancing, and being unwilling to challenge today, and direct victimization of children, and just simply saying someone's going to do the hard thing here. It is either going to be the adults who are going to do the hard thing now, or it will be the children who will have to do something even harder.
So if you touched on economics, every Western country, it seems, has lost or is losing control of their budgets, because no one will wear the sacrifices involved in repairing the damage that was done, say, during the Great Financial Crisis and then COVID. They both built government debt enormously, and as you say, our children are going to be the inheritors of that mess.
Yep.
But here's a further irony. We're going to load it onto fewer and fewer shoulders, because we're not having very many children.
Yeah.
We're rapidly approaching, in most Western countries, nothing less than a depopulation bomb.
Yes. What I appreciate about the debt chapter specifically, which was written by Phil Kerpen of American Commitment, is I think a lot of people look at the debt and they talk about it in terms of like, well, this is unsustainable. Well, we haven't seen numbers like this. He actually talks about it in moral terms. He says, this is fiscal child abuse. This is immoral, what we are doing to our children. We have not seen debt like this before.
I'll risk your ire by interrupting. I'd really try to avoid doing that with your guests, but you've hit on something that I think is so important. And it's when our generation lives beyond its means and refuses to accept responsibility for the fact that we're not being financially responsible. It is a major moral issue.
Yes.
Because it's going to impact on our children and our unborn children.
Right.
Of whom we're having fewer.
Yes.
So the burden for those children that we are having will be worse than ever.
Right.
That is a big moral issue. Sorry to interrupt, but
that's exactly right. And
wanted to underscore it.
What Phil lays out is a baby that's born today already owes $78,000 of the national debt. By the time they get to be 25, it's going to be close to $200,000. By the time they reach adulthood, when they should be building their own future, they're going to be paying for whatever commemorative bridge that you needed, or the foreign aid over here things that absolutely don't have any connection with their own well-being. It is immoral. And like you said, we are entering a population winter right now. The United States, all the numbers just came out this year, and it's worse than the previous years. I mean, we're not just at 1.7 anymore, we're down to like 1.5. And you can't fix that with immigration, obviously, because immigrants by the second generation often take on the same kind of birthing trends as the host nation. It's not a taxes problem, as Grover Norquist explains, American for Tax Reform. Grover's name is like synonymous with tax reform in the United States. He's been doing it for like 40 years. It's not we don't tax enough. It is we have a spending problem.
Yes.
Right? And that is what Phil makes very clear in the debt chapter. This is a spending problem. We cannot tax our way out of this. And if we do try to tax our way out of it, as Grover explains, you are taxing parents out of the home. You tax parents away from their children. You are taxing parental separation. Like, that's what you get for increased taxes. It is going to affect ordinary moms and dads. Kids are going to get less of them as a result. Taxes can't fix it. Out of control spending has got to be checked. And if we cannot solve it by capping the spending, just like what you said, we are handing a debt bomb to the next generation.
It's already playing out in most Western societies. Family formation is being interrupted by all sorts of things, but one of them is housing, the cost of housing. And so we've got a society now where there's a massive pressure on both parents to work and to put kids into childcare, even though many mothers, we know, well over half, would like much better arrangements than they have now. They're not so big on this idea of the state not only providing, childcare, not as much as politicians will tell you, but more or less forcing the kids into it. But that's part of the price we're already paying. Part of the depopulation bomb is being already powerfully driven, I would argue, by the economic policies that we've followed.
Well, and a lot of that, too, is captured in the Femininity chapter written by Peachy Keenan of Domestic Extremist fame. She outlined some of the lies that we tell young women about what it means to be a woman. Some of those lies are things like your career matters more than your children. She goes after daycare. She goes after the fact that a lot of women don't want their children in daycare. And it's not something necessarily, the women don't even want it. The kids certainly don't benefit from it. But we have inculcated into the next generation of young women that they should not care about their family or their children as much as clocking in at the office. And unfortunately, a lot of women learn that a little bit too late. Another one of the lies that she outlines is that men are optional in the family, right? That to be, truly independent and feminist, you don't necessarily need to get married. And she blows that myth out of the water, of course. And so, yes, you're exactly right. Like, we need to tell women the truth about the importance of motherhood, the truth that they very often discover after they have the baby in their arms, but maybe did not actually prepare for in terms of being married to the father of their child, so that they can stay home. And also to recognize that the materialism, it's not as important as the presence that you need to have with your kids, especially in the first 3 years. So we've got a lot of work to do just in terms of setting things straight in terms of women and their expectations. Like you said, it's not the patriarchal boogeyman who's telling women you should stay home with your kids. It's what women themselves want when they actually get to choose.
A lot of people would simply not be familiar with the arguments for marriage and for fatherhood. Can you just elaborate a little on what the chapter tells us about them being important?
Yeah, well, we have a whole chapter on masculinity, and it was written by Ken Harrison, who's the president of Promise Keepers, which is, if you're an American, kind of one of the big men's movement, father movement, Christian male movement all throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And he talks about how we have to get men right. And he outlined sort of the two extremes of masculinity, sort of this machismo, thump your chest, I've got to be like super macho, and then the polar opposite of sort of the beta male, like I'm ashamed of my masculinity. Masculinity is toxic. Both of those extremes are obviously devastating when young boys are going to fall on either one of those sides. The reality is that masculinity is power under control, and that's going to be manifest as you care for your wife and children. And if you don't have children, manifesting it in fathering the people around you by being protective of the men, the younger men, the kids in your life, mentoring other young men. So we have things that we need to get right about men and women. And of course, if you get those things right, you still have to get family right. I wrote the family chapter, which is a 3,000-word summary of our entire first book. And we outline, like the other authors, the lies of that specific topic. Lies like kids are resilient. So, you can divorce if you want to. Lies like kids don't need moms and dads. Gender's irrelevant. And of course, we know that men and women offer distinct and complementary benefits to kids. Lies like biology doesn't matter. Love makes a family. But we make it clear that biology is critical for kids in terms of understanding their own identity, but also ensuring that children are safe and loved, because a child's own biological mother and father lower their risk of abuse and neglect in ways that no other household arrangement will.